So if you guys have questions, you can address any of them to all of us. Put your hand up, and there's people in the audience with microphones so we can hear you. Thanks. And if you want to introduce yourself and where you're from.
Sure. My name is Amanda Batista. I'm with Oracle Marketing Cloud. Great presentations, everybody. Thanks for all that you shared. My question's directed for Billie. So I'd imagine that not everybody who'd like to wear these wearables can afford to or find themselves in the market for them, right? But how do you go about kind of your marketing and in terms of demographics, like who's your target buyer, and I'd imagine a lot more people who can't afford them would want them. So is that something that you find yourself running into?
It actually gets cheaper and smaller every 3 months. So as the products keep improving, we find that the demographic is changing. So what maybe started as like a $160 product could be a $60 product in 3 months' time. So as this keeps evolving, we're learning more and more about the consumer. The idea is to make these mass products so that they are accessible to everyone, so that everyone can experience them. And I think what really validated us was what Apple has started to do. And so they've claimed this idea of intimacy and like connectedness through the watch, and they've really said, okay, here is the portal to being able to communicate in a whole new way. And so they've really validated my decision to stay in this space. And I believe that because now 2 million people are used to this haptic feedback communication on the wrist, that those 2 million people will be interested in using it in other parts of their body.
Hello, and thank you very much. It's been really interesting. I'm a financial advisor, and I'm struggling. I have my own company, and I'm struggling with how to address robo-advisors, and it's a very intimate relationship you have with clients, and I think it takes it further in the 3D space to the question of now we have sort of GoToMeeting, and it's a very flat interaction. You've got little tiny videos of people. Where do you see that space going of virtual meetings and interaction and being able to collaborate together?
So great question. So I think the holding meetings in a virtual space is possible today. What's interesting is the challenge with virtual meetings is similar to the challenge of video conferencing. Some people don't want it, right? There's a sort of artificiality that comes with it. And so one of the things that people are experimenting with, and this is years out, is not VR for meetings, but AR, so augmented reality, which is the ability to enhance what you're doing with a layer, if you will, of virtuality to it. And that sort of helps people feel a little bit less like they're in this strange space trying to have serious conversations, but they're not really in that space. The other direction is avatars, right? Using avatars to be in a VR space, which sort of makes it feel a little less weird that you're in some sort of science fiction experience virtually. And people are obviously accustomed to using avatars. So I think that's coming, frankly, so the virtual meeting space, the virtual meeting room. But I think it's going to have some of the same challenges in adoption that any sort of meeting space has, whether it's video conferencing or what have you.
One over here.
Hi, I think my question is regarding VR as well. Just how big a factor is the Google Cardboard in terms of sort of mainstreaming VR and marketing? And is anybody actually able to dovetail VR into more traditional campaigns, like doing direct mailings of cardboard sets and trying to blend it together with other? And how big a factor is that going to be in sort of mainstreaming it?
Yeah, so Google Cardboard has absolutely been vital to, and for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically literally a piece of cardboard that you can construct, plug in a phone in the front, and then hold up, and you're in a virtual 360 video experience. So that is driving a lot of adoption on the part of consumers, which of course is attracting marketers to the space. Facebook just announced, or actually didn't announce, but the Wall Street Journal announced for them, they're building an app that will allow you to experience 360 videos. And there's nothing particularly interesting about that other than the fact that Facebook's eyeballs, all of those millions and millions and millions of consumers, are now going to have a very easy way of experiencing, downloading, and even uploading 360 video. So you take the cheap sort of cardboard device, you take the massive momentum and exposure that something like a Facebook app is going to drive, and marketers are going to have to start playing around with not just the gee whiz, one-off, isn't this cool experience, but to your point, integrated campaigns where the 360 video ties to something that's happening in an event, or something that's happening online, or something that's happening in a traditional 30-second spot. I personally haven't seen that being done particularly well to date. It's usually the gee whiz factor. Isn't it cool that you're driving in a Volvo in a virtual environment, or isn't it cool that you're climbing a mountain? North Face did something very interesting there, but I haven't seen that integrated in a much broader campaign strategy. It's very similar to the web when it first came online. Marketers would use that as sort of a one-off opportunity, but it took a long time for them to think about an integrated, calendar or campaign across all of those channels, and it's going to take a while with VR as well.
One back here.
Hi, Rajesh Anandan with UNICEF Ventures. I'd love to hear the question for Billie, but also the group, how you see the sort of connected home, the future of the connected home that goes beyond commerce. And we've been experimenting with sort of this notion of wearables for good, converting, in our case, kids' activity and movement to impact. We're now prototyping a product in a home environment based on a similar concept of everyday behaviors can save the world sort of thing. But all we're seeing in the space is these really kind of very basic commerce-based applications or safety applications of the connected home, and would love to hear your thoughts on where that could go beyond what's happening today.
Yeah. So I think what I thought was a good example that similar to what you guys are doing is what American Express did with Jawbone, where they created a point system around how much activity you're doing and then validating those points in terms of American Express travel points. Obviously, it's creating its own currency, and I think that's a really interesting way to do it. When it comes to the home, I think there are multiple opportunities with encouraging people to use their energy in a better way. I also see the future of this having biometrics on your body eventually control the air conditioner, so that there isn't this on, off, oh, I've left my air conditioner on for too long. It just knows your body has cooled down, you don't need it anymore. And I think that if we can start quantifying that, and that awful word, in a really sustainable and interesting way, then we can say, okay, this person is really smart about how they use and consume their energy, let's reward them in some kind of way. There's definitely, for me, an energy currency that is coming, and it's going to be a really interesting moment when they start trading those into the goods area. So when wearables for good and energy are all sort of communicating in a commercial way.
And I think we have to go beyond sort of everything being controlled by the mobile phone, because your whole lighting system in your home, we've now got the ability to be able to control that from a mobile phone. But when I could just switch it on and off, to be able to have to then switch on my mobile, find the app, surely it's quicker for me to just be able to switch it on and off. So having that whole connectedness where it will sense that you've walked into a room and you do or don't want the lights on, I think that's going to be quite important as well.
The only other thought that comes to mind, and this is not directly tied to your question, but in the medical device field, there's going to be, I think, a lot of interesting developments in the monitoring and control of devices that have been implanted that help diabetic patients or heart patients or whatever. And if you think about the good implications of that, if you have a parent who may be infirm and they live a long way away, you have the ability to sort of monitor and maybe even help through connected devices in a connected home, that parent. And so I think there are interesting applications there.
When it gets into that sort of issue, that sort of area, though, are there concerns about sort of the stability of, if it's a cloud-based system, the stability there? I mean, will people really want to sort of be able to entrust their health?
It's a good question. I think if I don't work for a medical device manufacturer, but I would think their answer might be, the amount of technology that is going into people's bodies today. If you trust, the pacemaker to keep your heart beating, you're going to trust, the technology to sort of help monitor. They're contemplating the cloud not being secure and up has a lot, broader concerns than just people's health. God forbid what would happen if the web went down in this room. People wouldn't know what to do.
They wouldn't be able to tweet.
Yeah.
Another one back in the back there.
Yeah, hi. A question for Adrian. We have 3 professors at the table here. What applications in VR have you seen in education?
VR actually started in large part, but in gaming and in education, and particularly in training. And so there's a lot of use today. So the military was an early investor in creating simulations that allow people to get trained on complex equipment. So we see the sort of, and it's not directly, I assume you're talking about more classroom training or classroom settings than actual training. I haven't seen anything similar to the meeting question earlier, anything that interesting in the VR space as relates to, say, virtual classrooms, but that's a very easy and straightforward application that I think would be coming, and a lot more, enabling a lot richer learning environment than the sort of online capabilities that are used today. But again, when it comes to training and learning with something that requires doing, that space has been mature for decades and will continue to grow.
Any other questions?
Actually, I have a question. Alison Miller from the Financial Times. A lot of larger brands are starting to dabble in the kind of Tango technology or the digital mapping of retail stores and potentially shopping that way. Do you see a future there in marketing and advertising, and do you think that it's a feasible next step in digital shopping?
So absolutely. I mean, I think the mapping of stores and wayfinding and the sort of connected store is going to be. It's here. There have been lots of I think failed experiments in that space. But I imagine when you think about mapping and the ability to, if this is where your question is going, the ability to sort of trigger experiences, offers, promotions, depending on where you are and how you're moving through the store. That's here today. And I think it's just a question of avoiding the creepy factor that was mentioned earlier, and also knowing enough about who that person is to be able to tune what it is that person will be experienced based on the store mapping.
And I think part of the challenge there is the data and connecting all that data together, because in terms of your location, there's different companies that will have a view on your location at a particular point in time. There are only certain retailers that have certain amounts of information about you. So there isn't really a complete picture. And I don't think we'll ever get to a point that we've got a complete picture, but it's making sure that data is used in a way that's relevant to consumers, because it's so easy to make assumptions and push out a campaign where you actually end up interrupting a thought process or a journey as opposed to enhancing it.
I read a fantastic quote that was like 90% of all data visualization on the internet is false. and it's actually true. So I think that's sort of relevant to what you're saying, that like you've got to have more than one data output to make it relevant, basically.
Yeah. I wonder, for Billie and Adrian, sort of the two worlds that you talked about, how you see those colliding. I mean, you mentioned the idea, I could, in terms of shopping, if I wanted to try on a dress, well, it certainly seems something you would then want to be able to integrate the kind of technology Billie is working on so that I could actually feel it. And do you see, are those things you're working on? Do you see those possibilities?
I think, sensory experiences go across all of them. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm super interested in the retail space. And I actually tried out the VR set at the US Open recently. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone saw that, where you receive a serve from Sharapova. Of course, I was terrible. I think there's more than one intersection of like this communication on the skin and this communication in your eyes and what you're hearing. And we just have to figure out a really nice and elegant way for this to happen together, rather than like it being super aggressive and in your face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the other sort of fascinating space that people are playing around with is the sense of smell, right? Which is one of the most powerful elements of any one experience. And so the ability to connect, sort of haptic sensors and experiencing in a virtual world, but also imagine getting the sense. That's when you really start to be fully immersed.
Yeah, deep emotional and
Once upon a time, we tried to quantify fun, and we came up with a pheromone smell, which actually just smells like mother's milk, and it's really disgusting. But it was interesting because it's the same idea. It's like, how do you play with all of these emotions at once?
Any other questions from the audience? All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists. This is great.
Thank you.
Really fascinating. And I think we all want to try out the products.